This is GARIS, Masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 460, entitled MGTOW for consciousness raising, masculism for law changing. This is part 2. Continuing straight on. 2. Legislate the para, that's paternity rejection right. Masculists claim that women oppress men far worse than vice versa, since so many of women's gender crimes against men are sustained, lasting decades. The worst of these is the decades-lasting manslavery by fluffy parasites. There are others, for example, paternity fraud, where in about 5% of pregnancies the husband is not the father. Thus the wife is parasiting off the money and labour of her husband for decades, the time to raise the kid. Such women are hated by masculists and want them punished, cast out of society for being manslaving vermin, truly hated. Another similar major gender crime committed by women against men is pill lying, where the woman lies to her boyfriend/husband that she is taking the pill, whereas in reality her clock is ticking hard and she really wants a kid, so stops taking it, gets pregnant, then forces him to pay for a kid he doesn't want, thus again manslaving him for decades. This is a gender crime on a massive scale, but millions of women do it routinely. To prevent these decades-long gender crimes against men by immoral parasitic females, the masculists push hard for the legislation of the paternity rejection right, which would give a man the legal right to reject an unwanted pregnancy. He fills in a government paternity rejection form so that if the woman goes ahead with the pregnancy, then she takes full financial responsibility for the kid. One of the many reasons why masculists insist that women FIP up is that if the woman does go ahead with the pregnancy and she's a FIP, then she can afford to pay for her kid and not impose decades of manslavery on him. Women who do impose manslavery on a man are truly hated by the masculists. The legislation of the para will bring the true hidden attitudes of women towards men out of the woodwork. Women evolved to be able to quickly, coldly, disloyally dump her man if he stopped giving her his resources. In the distant past, the very survival of woman depended on her being able to do this, since if she remained loyal to a non-resource providing man, then she starved. The idea that women only love men provisionally, that is, she will quickly fall out of love with her man if he stops being a provider for her, close brackets, is what the MGTOWs call the red pill. That is, the bitter truth that women do not love men unconditionally, the way men tend to love women. Women have a deeply held expectation of men that men exist on this earth to pay for women to have babies. Masculism attacks this attitude and attacks those women who hold it. It's likely that the legislation of the para will be as big a political and moral fight against women as when the suffragettes fought against men for the right to vote for women, which many men fought against who saw women as irresponsible children who did not merit getting the vote due to women's irresponsibility, a view many men still hold today. Look at what women are doing to whole populations in the divorce courts. But we men have a monopoly of our sperm, and nearly all men are FIPs, so we are in a position to force, in capital letters, women to grow up, to FIP up, since a fluffy can only survive if she can parasite off some manslave, but as said above, the supply of manslavable men is drying up. Masculisted men tell young women to vote with men, to mend fair the gender laws, to reform the divorce courts, to legislate the para, etc., or remain manless and childless. Masculists will force women to choose between the privileges given to women in today's divorce courts or being babyless, since we men have the power to stop giving women babies, which makes women crazy, since women are built that it is in their DNA to want to have babies. The passage of the para will remove the above decades-lasting gender crimes and make men more willing to be fathers again, so that whole populations are not wiped out. Today's fluffy feminist-controlled divorce courts and the Mara but no para scream out for gender justice. The Mara but no para is in fact the most blatant form of sexual discrimination that exists, and it's not against women but against men. It makes masculists hate the monoconscious feminazi bigots for their sexist hypocrisy. They are hated for this. 3. Increase male primary and secondary school teachers' salaries. This piece of legislation is aimed at boy-fairing, that is, making the gender laws fair to boys who are alienated at schools, since the large majority of their teachers are women, who are often monoconscious feminists who preach to these boys that men are toxic and the like. These little boys have almost no male role models, so feel alienated by the female world that surrounds them. Masculists want the salaries of male primary and secondary school teachers to be made higher as a form of positive discrimination, so that more men are attracted into primary and secondary school teaching to provide boys with more male role models, so that boys can learn to have some pride in their maleness instead of being fed feminazi poison by young feministed female teachers, as is happening so often today. 4. Create gender equality committees in parliaments that consist half of feminists and half of masculists. Most people, certainly most women, when they hear the term gender politics, they automatically think of feminism, since they know nothing about masculism. They are certainly not yet bi-conscious. There are many gender political issues relating to men that the masculists want addressed in the parliaments. So the masculists aim to create gender equality committees in parliaments that consist half of feminists and half of masculists, so that both sets of gender political issues are addressed equally. That is, both feminists and masculists, which is far from being the case today, given that nearly all feminists today are monoconscious. They are not even conscious just how brutally women gender oppress men. Once these gender equality committees are set up, the masculists in them can start the systematic reforms in society that the masculists are pushing for, especially the reform of the divorce courts, the legislation of the para, plus the other items in the above masculist list of changes needed in the law to make men's lives better. 5. Prosecute female false accusers. The rise of masculism will force women to grow up, to toughen up, to fip up, and take responsibility for their own lives. Society, as it becomes increasingly masculisted, will become much tougher on women, not tolerating the "poor little me" attitude of princess snowflake feminazis. So we'll expect women to not see themselves as victims, especially when they agree to start sexual relations with a young man, then have regrets the next day and decide to accuse him of rape. This is a major gender crime by women against men that needs to be prosecuted. Female offenders should be sent to jail for falsely accusing a man of rape, of assault and the like. Cops need to be masculisted so that they don't take the female's side automatically, knowing that many women don't take responsibility for their own lives and childishly, cowardly put the blame and responsibility on the man. Masculists hate such women too and want to see them in jail where they belong. 6. Push masculist ideas onto society so women fip up. The masculist gender politicians in the gender equality committees will be committed masculists, devoting their lives to the reform of society, aiming to make everyone bi-conscious, so that everyone knows that gender oppression is a two-way street. that women's oppression of men often lasts decades, that is, major gender crimes against men. The cure to all this is the fipping of women, the creation of a FIP society, one of the major political aims of the masculists. So these masculist politicians will create measures that encourage the fipping of women so that they expect to pull their own financial weight by bothering to get a career-competent education and be FIPs as adults. These masculist politicians can provide money for the creation of men's studies courses at university, at high schools, etc. They can create organisations that send out speakers to the schools to educate young women to FIP up and threaten them, scare them. If they don't FIP up, they won't get a man and hence live a miserable life, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless and spat at by society, since by the time they grow up, society will be totally bi-conscious, thanks to the efforts of the masculists, who are strongly motivated to create such a society. 7. Promote men's studies courses at universities. One of the major tasks of the masculists is to educate society that gender oppression is definitely a two-way street. One of the most effective ways of doing this is to teach masculist ideas at universities so that masculist ideas can then get passed on to the media and the population as a whole. Professorships in men's studies need to be created on a large scale, the way professorships for women's studies were set up in the 70s and beyond. The fact that there are women's studies courses and almost no men's studies courses is yet another glaring example of sexual discrimination against men. 8. Promote the formation of masculist groups in every high school and college campus. The masculist gender politicians can promote the formation of masculist groups in every high school and college campus by setting up organisations whose role it is to have a stock of masculist speakers who are sent out to high schools and colleges to teach masculist ideas to students, so that manslavery can be eliminated by pushing hard on women to FIP up or suffer badly. It's interesting that the new focus for gender politics will be in the middle schools, where most of the fluffy crapper damage is done. That is where some 80% of 16-year-olds decide to become fluffy crappers, thus becoming fluffy manslaving parasites as adults. Since by choosing to study fluffy crap majors, in brackets, that is the intellectually easy, intellectually lazy, memory-based majors, that is the soft option and not the hard option where you have to think, as with math and the sciences, close brackets, will make these young women career incompetent, who then, fluffy style, will look around for some manslavable man to parasite off to pay for her kids. Hence there need to be young masculists surrounding these young fluffy women to put enormous moral pressure on them to FIP up or be socially and sexually rejected by young men, cast out of the social group for being hated manslaving parasites, that is vermin, to be exterminated. ... The above give a pretty good taste of the sort of thing that the masculists want to see implemented in the political arena in terms of creating new men-fair laws. The MGTOWs don't mention such stuff, which is why the masculists have such a low opinion of MGTOWs, seeing them as apolitical wimps, as politically myopic, unable to see the need for such masculist legislation and masculist political measures. I feel myself, as a masculist, a whole historical phase ahead of the MGTOWs. The political myopia of the MGTOWs gets on my nerves. They are wimps. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de GARIS. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Manslaves to Women, an e-textbook of 460 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses. Freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.